here are the biggest gaming leaks and news you've probably missed this week. Alright, this one is quietly massive, because analysts are starting to line up around the same idea. PS6 is probably not coming anytime soon. Not because Sony is behind, not because something went wrong, but because PS5 is doing too damn well. Here's the context. A senior analyst named David Gibson from MST published a report for Sandstone Insights Japan looking at Sony's recent financials and future direction. And the takeaway is simple. Sony is printing money right now. Third quarter of the fiscal year ending February 2026 is expected to beat previous forecasts. We're talking roughly 1.8 trillion yen in sales, around $11.6 billion. Operating income around 160 billion yen, about $1 billion. That's not doing okay. That's open the vault. First-party games are performing. Third-party games are performing. PSN subscriptions are still strong. Everything that makes Sony money is firing at the same time. Now, here's the conflict. When your current console is this successful, why rush the next one? Gibson straight up says Sony expects the PS5 lifecycle to be longer than previous generations, and that likely pushes PS6 past 2028, which lines up with what a lot of industry folks were already whispering last year. So instead of a neat 7-year cycle like PS4, we're looking at something longer, possibly much longer. And the funny part, PS5 is now reportedly surpassing PS4 sales when you compare the same point in their lifespans. Let that sink in. PS4 is one of the most successful consoles ever made, and PS5 is ahead of it, despite launching into a pandemic, despite supply shortages, despite inflation, despite people screaming this generation has no games. Sony somehow turned PS5 into its most profitable console ever, maybe the most successful one, period. They don't need a savior, they don't need a reset, they don't need a Hail Mary. They already have the golden goose. So what do they do instead? They stretch the generation. Recent moves make that pretty obvious. Japan got a cheaper PS5 model. Black Friday 2025 had deep global discounts. Sony has been quietly targeting PS4 users with messages nudging them to upgrade. Not subtle either, basically. Hey, you've had your fun, come on over. At the same time, Gibson says Sony is shifting focus. Less obsessed with pure console unit sales, more focused on retaining existing PS5 users. Meaning, keep you in the ecosystem, keep you sub, keep you buying games, keep you engaged, because recurring revenue beats one-time hardware sales. Now, here's the wrinkle. Memory shortages are still looming. Component costs are still volatile. No price hikes announced yet, but Gibson admits Sony might eventually pass cost increases onto consumers, which is corporate speak for. If parts get more expensive, yeah, you're probably paying for it. Nintendo is basically saying the same thing, so both Sony and Nintendo are positioned for solid growth well into 2026. Meanwhile, Xbox hardware sales in 2025 were reportedly weak, which adds even more contrast. Sony and Nintendo are coasting. Microsoft is pivoting harder towards software and platform. Different strategies, different realities. The future of consoles might not be faster cycles. It might be longer ones, more mid-gen upgrades, more software evolution, less throw everything away every 7 years. Which leads me to this. If PS5 keeps getting banger games and keeps performing like this, would you even want PS6 in the next few years? Or are you cool riding PS5 for a long while longer? Sony might be quietly testing the most radical controller idea we've ever seen. Not a new color, not better rumble, not more buttons, no buttons at all. Everyone keeps obsessing over PS6 specs, CPU, GPU, AI upscaling, storage, all that nerdy beautiful stuff. But almost nobody is talking about the thing you actually touch the entire time you play, the controller. And that's weird, because Sony just published a patent that basically says, what if controllers stop having physical buttons altogether? Instead of fixed X, square, circle, triangle, you'd be using a capacitive touch surface, one smooth input shell, where virtual buttons appear based on how you hold the controller, your grip, your thumb placement, your hand size. The layout adapts to you, which sounds futuristic as hell. But here's the flip. It also sounds kind of terrifying, because muscle memory is sacred. You've spent your entire gaming life building instinct around physical buttons. You don't think about it, you just press. So the idea of pressing nothing nothing and trusting invisible zones to behave like buttons? That's a mental hurdle, a big one. But Sony's argument is actually interesting. They're saying current controllers are standardized. One size fits all. And that's kind of a lie. Different hand sizes, different grips, different mobility limitations. Therefore, they want a controller that molds around the player instead of forcing the player to mold around the controller. A single surface that can detect tap, press, swipe, slide, pinch, and multi-touch gestures. Think smartphone screen but shaped like a controller. So instead of learning where buttons are, you're teaching the controller where your buttons should be, which is both genius and mildly cursed. Because, yeah, in theory, accessibility skyrockets. Custom layouts become insane. But in practice, imagine picking up a friend's controller and nothing feels where you expect it. It's like sitting in someone else's car and the steering wheel is on the roof. You could adapt, but you're not happy about it. Now, here's where things get even more wild. This buttonless controller patent isn't alone. Sony has been on a full mad scientist streak with controller patents lately. One of them talks about controllers that can detect chemicals in your sweat, actual sweat, using spectroscopy, basically shining light on your sweat and reading how it scatters to identify things like glucose and cortisol, which are tied to fatigue and stress. So the system could detect that you're stressed, you're tired, or you're tilted. And then the game reacts. It could lower difficulty, make hitboxes bigger, add more forgiving timing windows, weaker enemies, longer reaction times. Not because you opened a menu, but because your body told the game you're struggling. That's insane. It's like your controller becoming a tiny therapist. But here's the uncomfortable part. Sony isn't just talking about helping you feel better. They're talking about dynamically adjusting gameplay in real time based on your biology, which means the game is quietly changing behind the scenes. You might think you clutched that boss fight, but the game secretly put the boss on easy mode because your cortisol spiked. That messes with the whole idea of mastery. Because are you improving, or is the system carrying you? And Sony didn't stop there either. Another patent shows a 3D grid-shaped controller that can physically deform. It can flex, shift, and morph in your hands to enhance immersion. So if you're squeezing a virtual object, the controller squeezes back. If something pushes your character, the controller pushes into your palms, which is cool, but also feels like the first step toward living inside the controller. So zoom out for a second. Sony isn't just thinking about better rumble or prettier plastic. They're rethinking what a controller even is. No buttons, biometric sensing, shape-shifting hardware. That tells you something important. PS6 probably isn't just about more teraflops. It's about redefining how humans physically interact with games. And that's exciting, but it's also risky, because every time hardware gets too experimental, you risk breaking the simplicity that made people fall in love with gaming in the first place. A controller is supposed to disappear in your hands, not constantly remind you it exists. So let me throw it back to you. Would you actually trust a buttonless adaptive controller? Or do you want physical buttons forever? Where do you land on that? All right, deep breath. Because this next chunk feels like watching 3 different car crashes happening at the same intersection. Ubisoft is on fire. New studios are tripping out of the gate. And live service shooters are once again asking us to trust them. So let's start with Ubisoft. Context first. Ubisoft is planning to slash around 18% of staff at its Paris headquarters. That's roughly 200 people. And it's not a rumor. It's part of what they're calling a major reset to stop the company's ongoing collapse, which already tells you everything. When a company starts using words like reset, it usually means we set the house on fire and now we're looking for a fire extinguisher. Now here's the conflict, because this is happening in France. France has extremely strong worker protection laws, which means Ubisoft can't just Thanos snap 200 employees into dust. They need approval from workers' unions. They need approval from French authorities. So even the layoffs are stuck in bureaucracy, which is ironic, because the thing Ubisoft is famous for right now is making bad decisions very quickly. Ubisoft's leadership is arguing the layoffs are necessary. They've canceled 6 games, closed 2 studios, and they're struggling to stay competitive, which on paper sounds logical, but employees in France are not buying it. They've already voted to strike, and they're accusing leadership of mismanagement, constant strategic whiplash, burning through talent, while executives somehow never seem to be the ones paying the price, which is the most Ubisoft sentence imaginable. And then we get to the soul-crushing part. Insider Gaming's Henderson Henderson says the Watch Dogs franchise is effectively dead, gone, finished, cooked, which hurts because Watch Dogs was one of Ubisoft's last remaining modern IPs that still had some identity. Now it joins the ever-growing Ubisoft graveyard. But wait, it gets worse. An actress named Iman Ayaz spent 3 years working on marketing for the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time remake. 3 years. Filmed marketing material, did press prep. 2 months ago, she was still working on it, and she found out the game was canceled by reading about it online. Not from Ubisoft, not from her agent, not from an email, from the internet, which means news outlets knew before people Ubisoft was paying. That is insane. That's not just mismanagement. That's disrespect with a corporate logo slapped on it. It's like showing up to your own surprise party and finding out you were fired halfway through the cake. So yeah, Ubisoft is not okay. Now, let's zoom sideways to another crash site, Highguard. This is a debut PvP raid shooter from Wildlife Entertainment, built by devs who worked on Apex Legends, Titanfall, Call of Duty. That's a stacked resume? On paper, it sounds like a guaranteed hit. So why did it launch to mostly negative reviews? Here's the context. They originally planned to shadow drop it, like Apex Legends, which worked beautifully for Respawn. But then Jeff Keighley liked the game so much, he offered them the One More Thing slot at the Game Awards, which is gaming's equivalent of being knighted. You don't say no to that. Nobody says no to that. So they pivoted, dropped a trailer. And the trailer did a terrible job explaining what the game actually is. People were confused, underwhelmed. Then the studio went almost completely silent for 43 days. No big marketing push, no deep dives. Their co-founder said they wanted the game to speak for itself, which is noble, but also suicidal in 2026. And when the game launched, it spoke loudly.
Welcome to hell, motherfucker!
Highguard hit a peak of around 97,000 concurrent Steam players, which is good, but only about 37% positive reviews, which is not good. Now here's the twist. When you filter reviews to players who played more than 3 hours, the positivity jumps to around 76%, which scientifically proves a groundbreaking discovery. People who like a game tend to keep playing it. Shocking. I know. Most complaints are about server issues, maps being too big, and the 3 versus 3 format not fitting the level design. The devs say they're listening. A patch is dropping, so Highguard isn't dead, but it's definitely limping. Now, let's talk about Marathon, Bungie's next big extraction shooter, launching March 5th. Marathon was announced as a revival of Bungie's classic 90s trilogy. In 2024, Bungie lost around a quarter of its staff. The 2025 alpha didn't land great. People were tired of extraction shooters and tired of studios known for story-driven campaigns pivoting into live service multiplayer experiments. We've seen how that goes. Anthem, various Ubisoft projects. You know the vibe. Players asked Bungie to delay Marathon, and Bungie actually listened, which is rare. They also resolved an art plagiarism situation and replaced the game's creative director. But during that time, another extraction shooter quietly showed up, Arc Raiders, and people actually liked it, which might help Marathon, because Arc Raiders reminded players that the genre can still be fun, especially when it leans more PvP than PvE. So Marathon isn't doomed, but it's definitely walking into a hostile room. That said, even if Marathon flops, it will go down looking beautiful, because the character designs and trailers are insane, thanks to art director Joseph Cross and animation god Alberto Mielgo, the Spider-Verse visual mastermind. So, worst case scenario, Marathon becomes the most stylish corpse in gaming history. Now zoom out, look at the pattern. Ubisoft collapsing under executive chaos. New studios struggling to explain themselves. Veteran studios pivoting genres to chase trends. Everyone chasing the same golden goose. Live service, extraction, engagement, recurring spending. But players are tired. They don't want experiments. They want good games. Finished games. Games that know what they are. So here's what I'm wondering. When you look at Ubisoft melting down, Highguard stumbling, Marathon rolling the dice, do you think the industry is finally hitting a correction point? Or are we about to watch even more studios learn this lesson the hard way? All right, ladies and gentlemen, strap in, because this next story is genuinely unhinged, like on a the inmates are running the asylum level. Here's the story. A bunch of investors saw Google show off its new AI world generator called Gienie 3, and instead of going, cool tech, interesting research, they went, oh, that's it, pack it up. Gaming is solved. Fire the developers, sell every gaming stock, buy AI stocks, let's ride. I'm not exaggerating. They actually started dumping shares in major gaming companies because because they think AI can already replace developers, which sounds hilarious. But here's the problem. They're acting like it's true, and the market reacted. CD Projekt stock dropped around 8% in a single day. That's not a blip. That's a punch to the face. Unity, down over 20%. Take-Two, down almost 10% in a day and around 16% on the month. That's wild, especially when Take-Two literally owns Grand Theft Auto. So what the hell spooked them? This. People started posting AI-generated videos made with Gienie 3, stuff labeled GTA 6 Greenland, fake open-world footage, driving, walking, shooting, characters that vaguely look like Michael, Trevor, generic GTA dudes, all stitched together into longer clips. And yeah, at first glance, it kinda looks like a game, but look closer. Speedometers glitch, hands melt, animations stutter, stuff hops in and out of existence. It's like the AI took a heroic dose of mushrooms and tried to recreate GTA from a half-remembered dream, which is normal. All AI models hallucinate. That's a core problem. But these investors don't see hallucinations. They see dollar signs. They're looking at this and going, some guy made this in 2 hours. Rockstar takes 10 years and $1 billion. Why are we paying developers at all? That's the mindset. And it gets even funnier. Someone typed, "Make me Fortnite." Gienie 3 spit out something that looks disturbingly close. Weird textures, broken text, janky geometry. But the jump animation, it looks like Fortnite, which immediately raises a bigger question. What the hell was this trained on? Because it sure as hell wasn't trained in a vacuum. It knows what GTA looks like. It knows what Fortnite feels like. It knows camera language. It knows animation rhythms, meaning it learned from massive amounts of real games and real footage. But instead of asking those questions, investors went straight to, well, guess we don't need game engines anymore either. Unity, sell it. Developers, replace them. Publishers, obsolete. Everything becomes an AI subscription, which is completely detached from reality. Because here's the conflict. Gienie 3 is not a game engine. It's not rendering persistent worlds. It's not running physics at scale. It's not simulating complex systems. It's generating short interactive video clips at low frame rates with zero long-term memory, zero consistency, zero actual gameplay logic. It's closer to an interactive video hallucination than a playable game. You cannot ship that. You cannot debug that. You cannot build a 100-hour RPG on that. You cannot make GTA on that. Not even close. But try explaining that to someone whose entire worldview is line go up. Now, let's talk about the real vision behind this tech, because there actually is a smart use case. Imagine a simulated digital world that accurately models physics, gravity, friction, collisions, cause and effect. You can train robots inside that simulation, instead of smashing up real kitchens. You let a robot make 100 million virtual cups of coffee in a few hours. It learns, then you drop it into the real world, and it already knows what it's doing. That's powerful. That's transformative. That's the utopian version. But instead, we're speedrunning the dumbest possible interpretation. Cool. Let's replace artists, which tells you everything about how these people think. They don't understand games. They don't care about craft. They don't care about design. They care about reducing cost and increasing quarterly profit. That's it. And this is where it gets dark, because public gaming companies live under this pressure constantly. If share price drops, leadership gets nervous. If leadership gets nervous, they cut staff. Developers get laid off. Not executives, not board members. The people actually making the games. So from an investor perspective, AI is a wet dream. No salaries, no unions, no sick leave, no human complaints, just servers and subscriptions, which is why this freakout matters. Not because Gienie 3 can replace developers. It absolutely cannot. But because people with money think it can. And people with money make decisions. The funniest part? Take-Two being down makes zero sense. They're about to release the biggest entertainment product in human history. GTA 6 will print money. It will bend reality. It will eat entire months of the internet. So watching Take-Two dip because of AI hype is like watching someone sell their house because a kid drew a picture of a spaceship. It's pure clown behavior. These stocks will rebound. They always do. Because reality eventually shows up. All right, this one is dense, but it's important dense. Like, you're gonna want to know this if you buy PC games dense. Valve just lost a legal battle in the UK. Not the big final boss fight, not the cinematic courtroom finale, but the kind of loss that opens the door. The kind where the judge basically says, yeah, this case is allowed to exist. And that might sound boring, but in legal land, that's huge. Because Valve tried to shut this whole thing down before it ever reached an actual courtroom. They failed. Which means Valve is now officially on the conveyor belt toward a full-blown court case over anti-competitive behavior. And if things go really badly for them, they could be on the hook for around £656 million. That's real money. But that's still not the scary part. The scary part is what they might be forced to change. So let's rewind. This all started with something called the Steam You Owe Us campaign, led by a consumer advocate named Vicky Shotbolt and a law firm called Milberg London, on behalf of roughly 14 million UK gamers. 14 million. That's basically an entire country's worth of people raising their hand and saying, hey, we think Steam has been quietly screwing us on prices. Not in a cartoon villain way, not in a twirling mustache way, but in a slow, structural, spreadsheet kind of way. The argument is simple on the surface. Steam is so dominant on PC that it functions like the mall, the parking lot, and the road that leads to the mall. If you want to sell PC games, you're basically forced to be on Steam. And because of that dominance, Valve can enforce rules that shape how games are priced everywhere else, not just on Steam, everywhere, which is where things start to smell. The claim says Steam's policies mean games and DLC end up more expensive than they would be in a truly competitive market. Meaning, you and I pay more than we otherwise should. Now Valve obviously hates this idea. So they went to the UK Competition Appeal Tribunal and tried to stop the case before it even started. Not, we're innocent. Not, here's our evidence. More like, don't even allow these people to try. Valve basically argued three big things. First, there's no reliable way to calculate how much harm was done. Second, there's no reliable way to prove Steam's policies actually hurt competition. Third, the class includes minors, and that complicates who could even get paid. Translation: this is messy, therefore you should throw it in the trash. The tribunal looked at that and said, nah, proceed, which is legal speak for, you've got a real case to answer. That's the loss. Now let's talk about what the case is actually poking at, because this is the heart of it. Steam takes around a 30% cut on game sales. That's been the industry standard for a long time. Console stores do it, mobile stores do it, everybody does it. But the claim argues two things. One, Steam's cut might be excessive compared to the actual cost of running Steam. Two, Steam uses its dominance to enforce what are basically platform parity obligations. Meaning, developers are strongly discouraged from selling their game cheaper anywhere else. Not just cheaper Steam keys, cheaper anywhere, even on their own website, even DRM-free versions, even other PC stores. If that sounds small, it isn't. Because imagine you own a bakery, and Walmart says, you're allowed to sell your bread here. But if you sell cheaper bread literally anywhere else, even out of your own garage, we kick you out. Now imagine Walmart is where 80% of customers shop. That's not competition, that's leverage. Valve's position is that this isn't harming anyone. The class reps argue the opposite. They say it effectively locks prices across the entire PC ecosystem. So other stores can't meaningfully compete, which means prices stay higher than they would be in a real free market. And here's the funny part. Valve didn't even really try to argue we don't have parity obligations. They mostly argued you can't prove they caused harm, which is like saying, I didn't poison the well. I just dumped something into it and now people feel weird. Now the tribunal didn't say the claimants are right. They didn't say Valve broke the law. They didn't say anyone wins. They only said these arguments are plausible enough that this deserves a real trial, which is devastating if you're Valve, because now you don't get to hide behind procedural fog. You have to open the books. You have to show data. You have to explain how your policies work in practice. And discovery is where corporations start sweating, because discovery is where emails exist. Discovery is where internal discussions exist. Discovery is where someone somewhere wrote something way too honest. We've seen this movie before, and it never goes well. Now let's zoom out. Why does this matter to normal people, even outside the UK? Because Valve has a long history of only changing Steam when regulators force them. Refunds? They didn't add those out of kindness. They were forced after legal action. Clear warnings that you're buying a license and not owning the game. That showed up after legal pressure. Arbitration policy changes? Same story. Valve does not wake up one day and go, how can we make Steam nicer? They wake up and go, lawyers are circling. And then changes happen. So even even if this UK case takes years. And it probably will. It adds to a growing pile. US lawsuits, EU scrutiny, Polish regulator investigations, now UK courts, all stacking like bricks on Valve's chest. Eventually, the weight matters. And if Valve were ever forced to loosen parity rules, or lower their cut, or allow real price competition, that could ripple across PC gaming. More stores competing, more discounts, more ways for devs to experiment with pricing, potentially more money going directly to developers instead of middlemen, which is good for games. More money to devs means more projects. More projects means more competition. More competition means better games and better prices. That's the theory. Now, will publishers always pass savings to consumers? Of course not. Some will pocket it, some will test higher prices. Capitalism, gonna capitalism. But giving them the option to compete matters. Right now, the system is basically a highway with one toll booth.